The small town of Millbrook seemed to sleep peacefully under the warm summer sun, but inside a neat two-story house on Maple Street, a storm was brewing. Michael Thompson stood by the large living room window, lost in thought. His reflection showed a man in his mid-40s, tall, well-built, with salt and pepper hair that spoke of wisdom and experience. Around him, the house whispered stories of his life. Family photos lined the walls, but something was different this time. A new picture caught the eye. Michael and Sarah, his bride-to-be, smiling together in a photo taken just months ago. Their engagement had been the talk of the town, a story of unexpected love that seemed too perfect to be true. Sarah Collins was everything Michael could have wanted. At 35, she was beautiful, successful, and seemed to understand him like no one else ever had. She worked as a marketing executive in the city, always dressed impeccably, with a smile that could light up the darkest room. Their relationship had blossomed quickly, surprising everyone who knew Michael. But Michael's life wasn't always this smooth. 10 years ago, he had lost his first wife in a tragic accident that had left their son, Daniel, devastated. Daniel was now 22, a young man who had struggled to rebuild his life after losing his mother. The relationship between father and son had been complicated, filled with unspoken words and hidden pain. As Michael adjusted his wedding ring, the one he hadn't yet given to Sarah, his mind wandered. He remembered the day they first met. It was at a business conference in Chicago, where Sarah had approached him after a presentation. There was something different about her, something that drew him in immediately. She was sharp, intelligent, and seemed to understand his world perfectly. Their courtship had been quick but intense. Within 6 months, they were engaged, planning a wedding that would be the social event of the year. Michael's colleagues were impressed. His friends congratulated him. Even Daniel had seemed to accept Sarah, though something in his son's eyes always made Michael slightly uneasy. The wedding was just days away. Everything was planned perfectly. The venue, the flowers, the guest list. Michael had spared no expense. It would be a celebration that would show the world he had found happiness again. A second chance at love, he told himself. But something felt different today. Michael couldn't shake off a strange feeling that had been haunting him for weeks. Small things, a look from Daniel, a sudden change in Sarah's behavior, unexplained phone calls, had been adding up. He tried to push these thoughts away, telling himself he was just nervous about the wedding. Outside, the afternoon sun began to cast long shadows. The wedding decorations were already being prepared in the backyard. White flowers, elegant chairs, and a beautiful arch where he and Sarah would soon exchange their vows. Everything looked perfect, almost too perfect. Michael walked to his study, pulling out an old photo album. He carefully opened it, looking at pictures of his past, his first wife, Daniel as a child, family moments frozen in time. Something about these memories made him feel restless. He couldn't explain why, but a sense of unease was growing inside him. Little did Michael know that the perfect life he had carefully built was about to come crashing down. The secrets that had been hidden for years were preparing to surface, ready to change everything forever. Daniel Thompson sat in his small apartment, surrounded by stacks of papers, photographs, and computer screens. The room looked more like a detective's workspace than a young man's living space. His laptop hummed softly, multiple browser tabs open, each revealing a piece of a puzzle he had been solving for months. He hadn't told his father about his investigation. Every night after working his day job as a junior graphic designer, Daniel would spend hours digging deeper into Sarah Collins' background. Something about her had never felt right to him. While everyone else saw a perfect partner for his father, Daniel saw something else. A woman hiding secrets. The investigation had started small. A strange comment here, an odd reaction there. Daniel remembered the first time he felt something was wrong. It was during a family dinner shortly after his father's engagement. Sarah had mentioned her hometown, and Daniel caught a slight inconsistency in her story. Most people would have missed it, but Daniel had always been observant. He pulled out an old photo of his mother. Maria Thompson had been a kind, loving woman who died in a car accident when Daniel was just 12 years old. Her loss had changed everything in their family. Michael had become distant, buried himself in work, and struggled to connect with his son. Now, years later, Daniel was determined to protect his father from any potential harm. Sarah's background seemed too perfect. Her LinkedIn profile was impressive. Marketing executive, multiple awards, connections with top-level executives. But Daniel had learned that perfect profiles often hide the biggest secrets. He had spent weeks cross-checking every detail of her life. His computer screen showed multiple documents, bank records, social media profiles, old news articles, each piece carefully organized. Daniel had a system. He compared dates, checked references, and looked for the smallest inconsistencies. Most people would have given up, but he was determined to uncover the truth. The wedding was just days away. Daniel knew he was running out of time. His phone buzzed. A message from an anonymous contact who had been helping him gather information. Check the hospital records from 2005. The message read. Daniel's heart raced. He had been waiting for this piece of information. As he dug deeper, a complex picture began to emerge. Sarah Collins was not who she claimed to be. Her story had carefully crafted holes, strategically placed to look like normal life variations. But Daniel was putting the pieces together, and what he was discovering was far more complicated than a simple lie. He thought about his father. Michael Thompson was a successful businessman, smart, and careful in his professional life. How could he not see through Sarah's facade? Daniel knew his father had been lonely after his mother's death. The pain of losing his wife had changed him, made him vulnerable in ways he didn't understand. The clock struck midnight. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes, taking another look at the documents spread across his desk. He knew what he was about to do would change everything. Exposing Sarah's true identity would not just shock his father, it would potentially destroy the life Michael had carefully rebuilt after his first wife's death. But Daniel also knew he couldn't stay silent. Whatever secret Sarah was hiding, whatever plan she had, it involved his father. And he would do anything to protect Michael, even if it meant creating chaos on the day of his wedding. Sarah Collins stood in front of her bedroom mirror, carefully adjusting her makeup. To anyone watching, she looked like a typical bride preparing for her big day. But behind her calm exterior, a storm of memories and emotions swirled beneath the surface. Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number simply read, "Everything is ready." A slight smile crossed her lips, a smile that held no warmth, only cold determination. She had waited years for this moment, carefully planning every single detail of her life, of her approach to Michael Thompson. The room around her told a different story than most would expect. Instead of wedding dresses and bridal magazines, her closet was filled with carefully organized folders, old photographs, and documents that told a complex story. Sarah, or the woman who called herself Sarah, was not who everyone thought she was. 10 years ago, her life had been completely different. She was Emily Rodriguez then, a young woman with a painful past and a burning desire for justice. The memories of that time were etched into her mind like a permanent scar. Michael Thompson had no idea how deeply their lives were connected, how much pain he had caused years ago. She thought back to the day everything changed. It was a rainy afternoon when she first learned the truth about her family, about the incident that had destroyed her life. Most people would have been broken by such knowledge. But Emily, now Sarah, had made a different choice. She decided to fight back, to plan her revenge carefully and precisely. The wedding was more than just a marriage. It was a carefully constructed trap, years in the making. Every smile, every conversation with Michael, every moment of their relationship had been calculated. She had studied him, learned his habits, understood his weaknesses. Michael Thompson thought he was in control, but he had no idea how little he truly knew. Her phone rang. It was her contact, the person who had helped her gather information, who had supported her plan from the beginning. They spoke in hushed tones, confirming final details. The wedding was just hours away, and everything was falling into place perfectly. Sarah picked up a small box from her dresser. Inside was an old photograph and a piece of jewelry, items that held more meaning than anyone could understand. These were the last pieces of evidence, the final proof of the story she was about to reveal. She had waited 10 long years for this moment. Daniel Thompson's investigation worried her. She knew he was close to uncovering something, but she was confident. She had covered her tracks so carefully that even the most detailed investigation would struggle to find the complete truth. What Daniel knew was just the tip of the iceberg. As she finished preparing, Sarah looked at herself in the mirror one last time. The woman looking back was a mixture of determination, pain, and a strange sense of justice. She was no longer the victim. Today, she would become the one who exposes the truth, who makes Michael Thompson pay for his past actions. The wedding was set to begin in just a few hours. To the outside world, it looked like a beautiful love story, a successful businessman finding love again. But beneath the surface, a much darker story was waiting to be told. Sarah knew that by the end of the day, everything would change. Michael Thompson's perfect life was about to come crashing down, and she would be the one to make it happen. The morning of the wedding arrived with a strange tension in the air. Millbrook Country Club buzzed with activity as workers set up chairs, arranged flowers, and prepared for what was supposed to be the most important day of Michael Thompson's life. Everything looked perfect, almost too perfect. In a small room backstage, Michael adjusted his white shirt, his hands shaking slightly. He had always been a confident man, but today something felt different. Memories of his past kept flooding his mind. His first wife, Maria, their life together, the tragedy that had changed everything. He pushed those thoughts away, trying to focus on Sarah and their future. His best man, Tom Reynolds, a longtime friend and business partner, noticed Michael's nervousness. "You okay?" Tom asked, straightening Michael's tie. Michael forced a smile. "Just pre-wedding jitters," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Tom knew Michael too well to believe that simple explanation. Outside, guests began to arrive. Luxury cars filled the parking lot. People dressed in their finest clothes walked towards the wedding venue. Whispers and excited conversations mixed with the soft summer breeze. Everyone seemed happy, expecting a beautiful celebration of love. Sarah was getting ready in a separate room. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of white silk and delicate lace. But beneath the beautiful dress, her body was tense. Every movement was calculated, every breath measured. She was not just preparing for a wedding. She was preparing for something much bigger. Daniel Thompson sat in his car outside the venue. He had spent weeks gathering evidence, connecting dots that nobody else could see. His folder was full of documents, photographs, and research that would change everything. He knew he had to act, but timing was crucial. One wrong move could ruin everything. The wedding planner rushed around, making last-minute arrangements. Flowers were checked, music was tested, and everything was positioned perfectly. To anyone watching, it looked like a dream wedding coming together. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Michael's mind wandered to his son. Daniel had been distant lately, distant in a way that made Michael uncomfortable. They had never fully recovered from the pain of losing Maria. Daniel had been just a child when his mother died, and the loss had created a gap between father and son that never quite closed. As the clock ticked closer to the ceremony, tension grew. The guests took their seats. Soft music began to play. The bridesmaids lined up, their dresses a perfect shade of pale blue. Everything was ready for the wedding to begin. But Daniel knew something they didn't. Sarah was not who she claimed to be. His investigation had uncovered a web of lies so complex that it would destroy everything Michael believed about his life. Years of secrets were about to come crashing down. In the quiet moments before the ceremony, Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Something didn't feel right. He looked around the room, his eyes searching for something he couldn't quite define. The feeling of unease grew stronger with each passing minute. Little did he know that the perfect wedding he had planned was about to become the most shocking day of his life. The truth was waiting, ready to explode like a hidden bomb, and nothing would ever be the same again. The wedding music began to play. Soft, elegant notes filled the country club's grand hall. Guests sat quietly, their eyes fixed on the white decorated altar. Everything looked perfect. White flowers, shiny decorations, and rows of carefully arranged chairs. But perfection can be a thin cover for deep secrets. Michael stood at the altar, looking nervous. His white tuxedo seemed to shine under the soft lights. He kept adjusting his collar, a simple movement that showed how uncomfortable he felt. Tom, his best man, stood beside him, watching carefully. Something in Michael's behavior seemed different today. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle first. Their pale blue dresses moved gracefully with each step. Cameras clicked, capturing every moment. Parents and friends smiled, expecting to witness a beautiful love story. Nobody knew what was about to happen. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The wedding march began to play. Guests stood up, turning to watch Sarah enter. She looked stunning in her white wedding dress. The dress was long and flowing, with delicate lace that seemed to catch every light in the room. Her smile was perfect, too perfect. But something was wrong. Daniel Thompson was not in his seat. He had disappeared just moments before the ceremony began. Michael noticed this, but tried to push the thought away. He wanted this day to be perfect. Sarah walked slowly down the aisle. Each step was carefully measured. To everyone watching, she looked like the perfect bride. But her eyes told a different story. They were cold, calculating, holding a secret that would soon destroy everything. Just as Sarah reached the middle of the aisle, the main doors of the wedding hall burst open. The music stopped. Everyone turned to look. Daniel Thompson stood there, holding a folder of documents. His face was a mix of anger and determination. "Stop the wedding." Daniel's voice echoed through the hall. The silence was so deep that everyone could hear his footsteps as he walked forward. Michael's face turned white. Sarah's perfect smile disappeared, replaced by a look of tension. The guests began to whisper. Some looked confused. Others looked shocked. Nobody understood what was happening. A perfect wedding was about to turn into something completely different. Daniel walked closer to the altar. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were clear. He looked directly at his father, then at Sarah. "You cannot marry her," he said, his voice strong and clear. "She is not who you think she is." Michael tried to speak, but no words came out. Sarah remained perfectly still, her white dress now seeming like a costume rather than a wedding gown. The room was filled with tension, with a sense that something big was about to happen. The wedding photographer kept taking pictures. Later, these photos would become evidence of the most dramatic moment in Michael Thompson's life. Guests sat frozen, unsure whether to move or stay still. Daniel opened the folder he was holding. Papers began to fall out. Documents, photographs, and what looked like official records scattered on the floor near the altar. Something big was about to be revealed, a truth that had been hidden for many years. The perfect wedding was about to become the most shocking event anyone had ever witnessed. The room fell silent. Daniel's sudden outburst created a shocking moment that seemed to freeze time itself. Guests looked at each other, confused and scared. The wedding photographer's camera stopped clicking. Even the air seemed to stand still. Michael found his voice first. "Daniel, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice a mix of anger and fear. His son had always been different since his mother's death, but this was something else entirely. Daniel looked different, no longer the quiet, hurt boy, but a man with a mission. Sarah, or the woman everyone knew as Sarah, remained perfectly still. Her white wedding dress now looked like a costume, something hiding a much darker truth. Her eyes met Daniel's, and for a brief moment, something passed between them. A look of recognition, of challenge. Daniel began to speak. "This wedding cannot happen," he said, his voice clear and strong. He started spreading documents on the floor near the altar. Old photographs, official papers, and what looked like detailed research covered the white marble floor. Each paper seemed to tell a piece of a larger, more complicated story. The first document showed a hospital record from 10 years ago. It was a strange medical report that didn't make sense at first. Names were partially hidden, but something about the document looked important. Michael tried to move closer to see, but Daniel stopped him with a look. "Who is she really?" Daniel asked, looking directly at Sarah. "The woman you're about to marry is not Sarah Collins. She has been lying to you from the very beginning." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Tom, Michael's best man, tried to intervene. "Daniel, this is crazy," he said, moving closer. But Daniel had prepared for this moment. He had evidence that would shock everyone in the room. The next document was a photograph. It showed a younger version of Sarah, or the woman called Sarah, standing next to a group of people. But something was different about this photo. It looked older, taken in a different time and place. The background was not what anyone expected. Guests started to whisper. Some pulled out their phones, ready to record what was happening. The perfect wedding had turned into something completely unexpected. Michael looked confused, his perfect day falling apart in front of his eyes. Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was something dangerous underneath. "Daniel," she said, "you don't understand everything." But Daniel was prepared. He had spent months investigating, collecting every piece of information he could find. The documents told a story that nobody in the room expected. It was about a past that Michael thought was long buried. Connections between people, events that had happened years ago, secrets that were never meant to be discovered. Michael's face began to change. The confident businessman started to look scared. He realized that something much bigger was happening. The wedding was no longer about love and celebration. It had become something else entirely, a moment of truth. Daniel looked at his father with a mix of anger and pain. "I'm doing this to protect you," he said quietly. The documents on the floor told a story that would change everything. A story of revenge, hidden secrets, and a past that refused to stay buried. The wedding hall became a battlefield of secrets. Michael stood frozen, his white tuxedo now looking like a costume of a life he no longer recognized. Sarah, or the woman he thought was Sarah, remained perfectly still, her white wedding dress a stark contrast to the chaos around her. Daniel began to speak, his voice breaking through the shocked silence. He pulled out an old photograph, yellowed with age. "Do you remember this?" he asked, holding it up for everyone to see. The photo showed a younger version of Michael standing next to a woman who looked very similar to Sarah, but clearly was not her. The story started to unfold. 10 years ago, something had happened, something that connected Michael to this woman's past. Daniel had spent months investigating, tracking down old records, talking to people who knew the truth. Each piece of evidence was like a puzzle piece, slowly revealing a bigger picture. "Her real name is Emily Rodriguez," Daniel continued. "And she's not here by accident. She's been planning this moment for years." His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. The documents on the floor told a story of pain, revenge, and a secret that had been buried for too long. Michael tried to speak, but no words came out. Tom, his best man, looked confused. The wedding guests were now fully involved, some recording the moment on their phones, others whispering in shock. The perfect wedding had become a public drama. Sarah, Emily, finally moved. She took a step forward, her white dress moving like a ghost. "You don't know everything," she said to Daniel, her voice calm but dangerous. "Michael doesn't know everything." Her eyes were fixed on Michael, holding a mixture of pain and determination. The first document Daniel had spread out was a hospital record. It showed a patient admission from 10 years ago, a woman who had been seriously injured in an accident. The name was partially hidden, but something about the record seemed important. Michael's face grew pale as he looked at it. My mother died because of what happened, Daniel said, his voice breaking. And this woman has been planning her revenge for years. He looked at Sarah, Emily, with a mixture of anger and pain. She had carefully built her entire life around this moment, around exposing Michael's past. The wedding photographer continued to take pictures. These photos would become evidence, a record of the moment everything fell apart. Guests sat in shocked silence, unable to look away from the drama unfolding before them. Tom tried to intervene. "Michael, what's going on?" he asked, but Michael couldn't answer. The documents on the floor told a story that went back years, a story of a mistake, of a tragedy that had changed multiple lives forever. Emily took another step forward. "I've waited 10 years for this moment," she said quietly. Her white wedding dress now looked like a weapon, something designed to destroy rather than celebrate. The perfect bride was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. Daniel continued to reveal pieces of the puzzle. Old court documents, medical records, photographs that connected Michael to a past he had tried to forget. Each piece of evidence was like a knife, cutting through the life Michael had built. The wedding hall had transformed. What was supposed to be a celebration of love had become a moment of reckoning. Secrets that had been buried for years were now coming to light, threatening to destroy everything Michael thought he knew about his life. The moment stretched like an endless thread. Emily Rodriguez, the woman everyone knew as Sarah Collins, began to tell her story. Her voice was quiet but strong, filling the silent wedding hall with a pain that had been hidden for 10 long years. 10 years ago, my family was destroyed because of Michael Thompson, she said, her eyes fixed on Michael. The wedding guests held their breath. Daniel stood nearby, watching every movement carefully. The white wedding dress now looked like a uniform of war, not a symbol of love. She pulled out a photo that changed everything. It showed a younger version of herself with her family, a happy group of people who looked nothing like the woman standing in the wedding hall today. "My sister died because of a mistake Michael made," Emily continued. "A mistake that was covered up, that destroyed my entire family." Michael's face turned white. Tom, his best man, looked confused. The documents on the floor told a story that nobody expected. It was about a car accident, about a decision made years ago that had consequences nobody could have predicted. The story went back to a night 10 years ago. Michael was a successful businessman even then, with connections that could make problems disappear. A car accident had happened, an accident that officially looked like a simple tragedy. But Emily knew the truth was much more complicated. Her sister had been in that car. She had died, but the real story was buried deep. Michael had used his influence to hide the truth. Powerful friends, legal connections, money, all had been used to cover up what really happened that night. Daniel had spent months putting the pieces together. Each document was a puzzle piece that revealed a darker truth. Hospital records, police reports, secret communications, all pointed to a cover-up that had destroyed Emily's family. "I changed my entire life to get close to you," Emily told Michael. Her voice was calm, but filled with years of pain. "I became Sarah Collins. I built a life that would make me perfect for you. Everything was planned." The wedding guests listened in shock, unable to look away. The wedding hall had transformed. What was supposed to be a celebration of love had become a courtroom, a place of judgment. Emily stood like a prosecutor, presenting evidence of a crime that had been hidden for years. Michael tried to speak, but no words came out. His perfect life was falling apart. The businessman who had always been in control was now completely powerless. Tom tried to support him, but Michael seemed to be shrinking under the weight of the truth. Daniel watched carefully. This was more than just exposing a lie. This was about justice for his mother, for Emily's sister, for all the people who had been hurt by Michael's past actions. The documents on the floor were like weapons, each one a blow to Michael's carefully constructed life. The wedding photographer continued to take pictures. These would become historical documents, proof of a moment when everything changed. Guests whispered, some in shock, some in disbelief. The perfect wedding had become something else entirely, a moment of truth. Emily was not finished. "I spent 10 years preparing for this moment," she said. 10 years of building a life, of getting close to you, of planning how to make you understand the pain you caused. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a decade of planning. The white wedding dress seemed to become a symbol of something more than marriage. It was a costume of revenge, carefully designed to destroy everything Michael Thompson believed about himself. The wedding hall had become a place of complete chaos. Emily's words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, crushing Michael's entire world. Everything he had built, everything he believed about himself, was falling apart piece by piece. Daniel stood close to Emily, his face a mix of anger and pain. He had spent years trying to understand the truth about his family, about his mother's death, about the secrets that had torn his life apart. Now finally, those secrets were coming to light. Michael tried to speak, but his voice came out weak. "I never meant," he started, but Emily cut him off. "You never meant to get caught," she said coldly. The wedding guests watched in complete shock. Some were recording the moment on their phones. Others sat frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. The documents on the floor told a complicated story. A car accident 10 years ago, a family destroyed, powerful people covering up the truth. Emily had spent a decade planning this moment, building a new identity, getting close to Michael, preparing to expose everything. "My sister died because of a choice you made," Emily continued. Her white wedding dress seemed to glow under the hall's lights, a symbol of her carefully planned revenge. "You used your connections to hide the truth. You made her death look like a simple accident." Tom, Michael's best man, tried to intervene. "Michael, what is she talking about?" But Michael couldn't answer. His perfect life was crumbling around him. The successful businessman, the man everyone respected, was now exposed as someone with a dark past. Daniel pulled out more documents. Old police reports, medical records, communication logs. Each piece of paper told a part of the story. It was about a night 10 years ago when a car accident changed everything. Michael had used his power and connections to hide the real truth. The wedding photographer kept taking pictures. These would become historic documents, proof of a moment when everything changed. Guests whispered, some in shock, some in disbelief. The perfect wedding had become a public trial. Emily wasn't just seeking revenge. She wanted justice. She had carefully built her entire life around this moment, creating a new identity, getting close to Michael, planning every single detail of her approach. She had become the perfect bride to destroy the perfect life. Michael looked defeated. His white tuxedo, which had once represented success and happiness, now looked like a costume of lies. He realized that everything he had built was about to fall apart. His secrets, hidden for so long, were now exposed to everyone. The hall was completely silent. Even the air seemed to be holding its breath. Daniel looked at his father with a mixture of anger and pain. Emily stood tall, her white wedding dress now looking like a weapon of justice. Michael stood alone, everything he believed about himself falling apart. "I spent 10 years preparing for this moment," Emily said quietly. 10 years of waiting, of planning, of building a life that would get me close to you. Her voice was calm, but filled with years of pain and determination. As the truth came out, the wedding transformed into something else entirely. It was no longer a celebration of love. It was a moment of justice, of secrets being exposed, of a past that refused to stay hidden. Michael Thompson's perfect life was over. The white wedding hall, with its perfect decorations and carefully planned details, had become a place of complete destruction. Everything Michael thought he knew about himself was falling apart. And the truth, which had been hidden for so long, was finally free.